Now, with all the controversy and conflict surrounding the VAT hike, a series of indirect tax hikes that will impact the financial strain on households will soon come into effect. Additional levies on fuel, carbon emissions and households are expected to further drive up the cost of living. These changes are expected to generate significant government revenue, but could reduce the disposable income of many South Africans. Tax Justice Project Officer at the Alternative Information and Development Centre, Chloé van Biljon, joins us for more. Chloé, very good evening to you. Thank you for your time. As we learn that the proposed VAT increase will still proceed under the current circumstances, even if the 2025 budget has not been passed through Parliament, what should we expect as we go into April? Because there are some changes coming.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on. I think that this VAT increase is going to affect the poorest of the poor worst. So when we think of different taxes, some are progressive and others are regressive. And VAT is a regressive tax, which means that it really affects the poor the worst. It has a higher burden on them. And in a case where, 55% of South Africans are living below the upper bound poverty line, which is just 1,600 Rand a month, we really can't afford to have this kind of situation where the cost of living goes up and that causes inflation. So we also know that 1 out of every 5 South Africans experience moderate to severe food insecurity. So this increase in their grocery bill is really going to hurt them severely. And I think what's really important is that there are better options for bringing in revenue. The state does need to finance important things like our hospitals and schools, but there are better options that don't cause as much inflation and don't put such a big burden on the poor.
Like what?
Unequal country in the world. So for the most unequal country in the world, I think it's important that we consider wealth tax. If you look at our distribution of wealth, 1% of South Africans own half of the total wealth. So estimates on a wealth tax find that if we tax just the top 1% of South Africans, 1% of their wealth, and then we tax the top 0.01%, like a tiny portion, 3% of their wealth, we can bring in 73 billion a year, which is much higher than the VAT is about. The VAT that will affect us all is estimated to bring in 28 billion a year. So this is much more money and only affects such a small proportion of extremely wealthy people.
So how will households have to now contend with the above inflation adjustments? Because we do know that one aspect was no increase was announced for the health promotion levy, well, better known as the sugar tax.
I think, so the sugar tax one, it is important to have taxes that incentivize healthy behavior. And the health promotion levy is really a tax on sugary drinks. So trying to get households to move away from unhealthy, expensive options towards healthier, cheaper options, I think is a valid kind of tax to have in place. And so I think, giving up, they didn't increase it by inflation, means that they're giving up revenue that could have been used to fund our public hospitals, fund our public services properly. So I think that kind of tax is important for bringing in revenue to look after our public services.
We're also learning that although there's widespread anger at the increase, the potential increase in VAT is the least damaging to economic growth. How so?
So this is an interesting thing. So Treasury has said that according to their models, it's the least damaging to growth. But researchers who have looked into this have found that Treasury's model actually puts this in as an assumption rather than it being an outcome from their modeling. So they assume it to be the least harmful for a variety of reasons. So they're a bit dishonest in the way that they are portraying it as the least harmful. And what they admit is that their own modeling shows that it's the most inflationary tax of all the taxes. So yeah, I think that one about it being the least harmful to growth is controversial.
So with this budget having offered so little for relief for struggling South Africans, what options do you think it now opens up? Opportunities, to be smarter in terms of navigating around these increases?
It's a tough one, I think. What they often say is that the zero rating is going to provide relief to households. But what we see in the Treasury's own results is that zero rating doesn't often work. So, stores are responsible for the VAT you pay on an item, for passing that money on to the state. But when individuals are used to a certain price for a product and shops know that they're willing to pay that price, they won't necessarily decrease the product by how much it's less VAT now. So, it should decrease by full 15% if something's been added to the zero-rated list. But shops very rarely actually decrease that item by that full 15%. So we don't believe that the zero rating is going to bring the relief that the state thinks it will bring to low-income households. So yeah, that's extremely problematic. And I think what you really need to see is that the state explores options for raising proper revenues, like the wealth tax I mentioned. We also see that if you look at effective tax rates on salaries, our personal income tax, these effective rates have actually been come down since the 90s. And we know that, it's a progressive tax where the more you earn, the higher you pay. And we really think that the state needs to make sure that these effective rates come back in line with what they were in the 90s, so that we can properly fund our hospitals, properly fund our public services.
As you talk about exploring options like the wealth tax, I mean, it's a conversation that's been ongoing for quite a while now. Where are the loopholes? I mean, what will it take for government to really take that line seriously?
It's a good question. They've been, the state itself has said that they've been exploring the wealth tax, but they just keep sort of pushing it down the road, kicking the can down the road, not actually doing anything about it. I think that they need pressure. They need public pressure to put it into place. I think that's the most likely way that we will see it, is that if together social movements, trade unions, ordinary people come together and put pressure on the state to do this, and of course politicians as well. We need people to take this up and push for it.
Very well. Thank you so much for speaking to us this evening and weighing in on this discussion. Wrapping up that conversation with Tax Justice Project Officer at the Alternative Information and Development Centre, Chloé van Biljon.